In today's episode, Ricky and Lucy were having breakfast. Ricky was reading the newspaper while Lucy asked if he wanted more coffee, but he didn't answer and kept reading. Lucy asked if he was okay, but even after asking several times, Ricky didn't reply. Upset Lucy, who started talking to herself and pretending someone else was there, but Ricky still didn't notice, absorbed in his newspaper. Frustrated, Lucy asked if he was still behind the newspaper, but there was still no answer. When Lucy threw bread from the toaster, Ricky caught it while continuing to read the newspaper and started eating it. This made Lucy furious, and she got up from the dining table and walked out the door. Through all of this, Ricky just kept reading and eating his bread. When there was a knock at the door, Ricky told Lucy to open it, not realizing she wasn't in the kitchen. After the second knock, Ricky again called for Lucy to see who was there. At the third knock, Ricky finally looked around and discovered Lucy was gone. He stood up and opened the door while still reading the newspaper, not bothering to look who was there. It was Lucy at the door who asked if there was a lady in the house. Ricky called for Lucy without looking up, still reading the newspaper, but after a moment, he noticed her standing there. Ricky asked what she was doing outside, adding that she should stay with him during breakfast, at least in the mornings. Hearing this, Lucy returned to the dining table without explanation, but Ricky remained oblivious. He checked his watch and mentioned he needed to leave for work, saying he'd be back at dinner time. Still distracted, when he tried to give Lucy a goodbye kiss, she handed him the sugar ball, which he didn't even notice. After Ricky left for work, Lucy was sad and furious. While cleaning the kitchen, Ethel appeared at the window and said hello, but Lucy didn't respond. Concerned, Ethel came inside and asked what was wrong. Lucy replied, fine, in a bad mood. When Ethel started having coffee and bread without noticing Lucy's mood, Lucy confronted her. Finally, Ethel realized Lucy was upset and asked if she and Ricky had argued. Lucy explained it was a one-sided argument where only she participated, adding that she was tired of having breakfast opposite a newspaper. Ethel asked if Ricky hid behind the newspaper every morning, ignoring Lucy and refusing to answer questions. Lucy confirmed this was happening lately. Ethel turned to Lucy and mentioned this was a case for Dr. Humphreys. Lucy responded, "Who is Dr. Humphreys?" Ethel repeated the doctor's name and mentioned he had written a book called How to Keep the Honeymoon from Ending. Lucy casually replied that she had that book. When Ethel suggested Lucy should read it, Lucy asked what Dr. Humphreys could possibly know about Ricky. Ethel asked where the book was, and Lucy showed her. Ethel found it and began reading aloud. According to the book, if a husband loses interest in marriage after a year, reads the newspaper all the time, doesn't answer his wife's questions, and generally acts as if he doesn't have a wife, there's a problem. Hearing this, Lucy wondered how Dr. Humphreys had ever met Ricky. Ethel continued reading, explaining that this unfortunate condition happens because of the wife's behavior. When Lucy protested that this was nonsense, Ethel read that the doctor predicted some wives would disagree. They exchanged glances before Ethel read further that research showed this happens when wives become careless about their appearance. Lucy paused, looked at herself, and admitted she did come to breakfast with her hair in curlers. She noticed her sloppy clothes and lack of makeup. When Ethel read that wives needed to do something about this situation, Lucy asked what she should do. The book's advice was clear. Dress up for their husbands. Be glamorous and sophisticated. Look so good that husbands can't take their eyes off them and won't want to leave for the office. This cheered Lucy up, and she declared she would be dazzling the next morning. The following morning, Lucy entered looking gorgeous. Ricky was reading his newspaper as usual. She greeted him sophisticatedly, but he didn't notice. She tried again, asking if he wanted more coffee, then more sugar, but Ricky remained absorbed in his newspaper. Frustrated, Lucy loudly announced she wanted a divorce. Still reading, Ricky absently replied, "That's nice." Finally, losing her cool, Lucy set fire to the newspaper. Suddenly, seeing smoke and fire, Ricky ran to the sink shouting. After extinguishing it, he finally noticed Lucy and asked if she was crazy. When Lucy asked him to look at her, Ricky commented that she didn't look well and seemed sick. He asked to see her tongue and suggested she should see a doctor. Irritated, Lucy insisted she was fine. Though unconvinced, Ricky eventually accepted her word, told her to take care of herself, and left for work. Lucy stood there for a moment before running after Ricky, but he was already gone. Disappointed, she muttered that it was all Ethel's and her book's fault, and began dialing Ethel's number. While dialing, Ethel entered the house. Lucy, still on the phone, didn't realize Ethel was physically present and continued her phone conversation. When Ethel tried to get her attention, Lucy said she'd be with her in a moment, still talking on the phone. Finally, Lucy realized Ethel was actually there and felt foolish. Ethel complimented Lucy's appearance and asked if everything was okay. Lucy replied dejectedly that nothing was okay. When Ethel asked what happened, Lucy explained that was precisely the problem. Nothing had happened, and Ricky had ignored her as usual. Ethel expressed sympathy and decided to check the next chapter of the book, despite Lucy declaring the book was fake and the author knew nothing. Ignoring Lucy's protests, Ethel read the next chapter. If the first method fails, wives should join their husbands' hobbies and interests and become their pal. Ethel explained that if a husband likes fishing, go fishing with him. If he hunts, go hunting. Lucy mentioned that Ricky liked poker. Lucy remembered Ricky was playing poker that night with Fred and the boys and decided she would join them. Though enthusiastic at first, she suddenly realized she didn't know how to play poker. Ethel offered to teach her in a few hours. That evening, Ricky was playing poker with Fred and the boys, enjoying their game, when Lucy entered dressed like her husband. Everyone stared, stunned and confused. Lucy greeted Fred, while Ricky, looking bothered, asked what she was doing there. Lucy said she'd like to join if they didn't mind. Ricky protested that she didn't know how to play poker, but Lucy interrupted, explaining that Ethel had taught her. This news made Fred even more nervous. Ignoring their reactions, Lucy pulled up a chair next to Ricky and told them to make space. Ricky's friend Hank seemed uncomfortable, though the boys tried to hide their displeasure. Ricky told Charlie to deal the cards, and when Lucy noticed she didn't have chips, Ricky gave her some to bet with. Lucy examined her cards, reading each one aloud until Ricky told her to keep them secret. Fred, annoyed, let out a small shout. Lucy asked if he was okay, and Fred tersely replied that she should pick up her cards faster. As the game progressed, Lucy's slow play tested everyone's patience. When it was her turn, she would stare at her cards while Fred coughed in irritation. Ricky had to repeatedly remind her to take her turn. When Lucy admitted she didn't know what to do, she accidentally revealed her good hand, causing the boys to fold in frustration. Despite the others' annoyance, Lucy enjoyed herself and insisted on dealing the next hand. Fred and the boys looked helpless as the game continued. After several rounds, only Lucy and Fred remained. They kept raising the stakes until Lucy became confused about the rules. After the boys explained them, Lucy claimed she had 4 of a kind, causing Fred to concede defeat. However, when Ricky asked to see her 4 of a kind, Lucy showed just 2 cards, saying she had a pair. Ricky had to point out that what she thought were 2 nines was actually 1 9 and a 6, leaving him exhausted and disappointed. The next day, Lucy told Ethel that everything in the book was nonsense and she shouldn't have followed its advice in the first place. She added that Ricky hadn't even spoken to her that morning. Ethel pointed out that Ricky hadn't been talking to her in the mornings for weeks. Ethel began reading the book again. First, she read that if wives play games with their husbands, they should make sure not to win. Lucy sighed at this belated advice. Reading further, Ethel found that most men have happy memories of their carefree childhood, and wives should try to recreate that feeling. Lucy couldn't understand how this would work, but Ethel suggested that Ricky might be missing his days in Cuba. Although Lucy thought this was ridiculous, Ethel insisted she was onto something and suggested transforming their home to remind Ricky of his childhood. That evening, when Ricky came home, he was bewildered by the scene before him. He thought he'd entered the wrong house, but there was Ethel in disguise, assuring him he was in the right place before disappearing into the kitchen. Ethel started playing music. Moments later, Lucy appeared dressed as a Cuban dancer and began to dance. Ricky stood confused, trying to make sense of the situation. The performance took an unexpected turn when the record player got stuck and Lucy, dancing too enthusiastically, lost control. When Ricky demanded to know what was going on, Lucy, still in character, called in some neighborhood children who rushed to hug Ricky. causing him to fall backward onto the sofa. Finally having enough, Ricky asked Lucy to explain herself. Lucy admitted she was trying to recreate his childhood days. When Ricky asked why, Lucy confessed she thought he didn't like her anymore and hoped this would help him fall for her again. Hearing this, Ricky softened and told Lucy that if he'd wanted to stay in Cuba, he would have remained in Havana. He added that what he loved about her was that she was different from anyone he'd known in Cuba. Lucy couldn't help asking, "Who did you know in Cuba?" Ricky just smiled, and they embraced their silly misunderstanding resolved with love and understanding. The episode ends with this heartwarming reconciliation, showing that sometimes the best solution isn't found in self-help books, but in honest communication and accepting each other's uniqueness.